If you've been gardening for any length of time, you know this morning. You walk out with your coffee, the light's still soft, you're feeling pretty good about the world, and then you look down. The tomato leaves are chewed to lace. There's a line of aphids working up a pepper stem like they've signed a lease. And that squash plant you started from seed and babied along on the windowsill, something got to it in the night. I know exactly what most of us reach for, because I reached for it too, for more years than I'd like to admit. You grab a bottle of something, spray everything down, and hope. Maybe it buys you a week. Then they're back. They're always back. And season after season, it feels like you're fighting the same war, with the same weapons, and somehow still losing a little ground each year. Here's what took me a long time to understand, and it's the whole point of what I want to talk through today. The spray bottle is the last tool you should reach for, not the first. Most of the best pest control doesn't come in a bottle at all. It comes from how you set the garden up, the soil, the mix of plants, the insects you invite in, and a few minutes of attention at the right time of day. None of this is new. A lot of it is old, the kind of thing gardeners did for generations before the pest control aisle existed. Now, I'm not going to romanticize all of it. Some of that old knowledge holds up beautifully under a modern microscope. Some of it is half true, and some gets repeated online with a lot more confidence than it's earned. So as we go, I'll tell you which is which, what I'd stake my own garden on, and what I'd only call worth a try. Let the garden do more of the work. You just have to set it up so it can. The first thing, and this is the one I overlooked the longest, is that pest control starts in the soil, not on the leaves. When you see a bug eating a plant, every instinct says treat the plant. But a strong plant in good soil handles a bit of feeding the way a healthy person shrugs off a cold. A weak, stressed plant in tired soil is the one that gets overwhelmed. There's real backing for this. Plants grown in soil that's alive, good organic matter, steady moisture, a working population of microbes, tend to have sturdier growth and better natural defenses than plants pushed hard on quick synthetic fertilizer. I'll be careful though, because you'll see people claim healthy soil makes plants pest-proof. That's not true. Nothing makes a plant pest-proof. But healthier plants recover faster and get overwhelmed less often, and over a few seasons, that difference adds up to a lot less damage. Here's the part one want you to notice, because it saves you money. This is the opposite of buying more. One of the most common ways we create our own pest problems is by overfeeding with high nitrogen fertilizer. A lot of nitrogen pushes out a flush of soft, sappy new growth, and soft, sappy growth is exactly what aphids and the other sapsuckers want. I did this to my own tomatoes for years, fed them heavy, got big leafy plants, and couldn't work out why the aphids loved them so much. The plants were basically advertising. So here's what I'd do, and it costs about as close to nothing as garden advice gets. Each spring, before you plant, lay down 2 or 3 inches of well-aged compost and work it into the top few inches of the bed. If you can get aged manure into it, even better. The older growers I learnt from swore by winter composted manure. But plain homemade compost, or a decent bagged one, does the job. The key isn't doing it once, it's doing it every year. Build the soil a little each season and let it get richer over time. After 2 or 3 years, you'll notice your plants standing up to pressure that used to flatten them. One timing note, because your climate has the final say here. Get that compost down as early as the ground is workable, so the soil life has a few weeks to wake up before you transplant. In a short season spot, that might be the moment the ground thaws. In a warm one, late winter. Either way, earlier beats later. The second change made my garden look messier and work better, and it took me a while to make peace with that trade. Most of us plant in tidy single crop blocks, tomatoes here, beans there, squash off in its own corner. It's organized and easy to pick. But from a bug's point of view, a cabbage moth hunting for cabbage finds your long, clean row of nothing but cabbage the way you'd find a billboard. You've concentrated exactly what it's looking for and made it easy to find. The old kitchen gardens didn't look like that. They were mixed, herbs and flowers tucked in among the vegetables, partly for the cook and partly because it worked. Break up the block and you break up the signal. A pest that navigates by smell has a harder time locking onto your tomatoes when there's basil and dill and marigold, muddying the air. Now here's where I have to keep myself honest, and you too, because companion planting is a place where good sense and pure folklore get sold in the same package. Let me sort a few of the popular claims. Basil next to tomatoes. You'll hear it repels aphids, whiteflies, even hornworms. The truth? The research is thin and mostly doesn't back the big claims. But basil costs a couple of dollars, grows happily beside a tomato. Plenty of gardeners feel like it helps a little, and worst case, you've got basil for the kitchen. That's a fair bet, just don't expect a force field. Marigolds, French marigolds, the small ones, not the big African types, release a compound from their roots that really does suppress certain root knot nematodes. That part is well documented. But here's the catch people leave out. You get that effect when you grow marigolds thickly through a bed, often as a cover crop the season before, not from a few plants dotted around the border. So plant them, enjoy them, but if nematodes are your actual problem, a handful of border marigolds isn't the cure. What does reliably work is the flowering itself. When you let dill, cilantro, and herbs like them flower between your rows, those small flowers feed the predators and parasitic wasps that hunt aphids and caterpillars. That's the real payoff of interplanting and the least folklory part of the whole business. So here's what I'd actually do. Tuck a basil plant near every few tomatoes, run dill or cilantro between the cabbage and broccoli, and let it flower rather than pulling it the second it bolts, because the flowers are the point. Edge the beds with small French marigolds. If you're somewhere hot where cilantro bolts almost overnight, use summer savory or dill instead. You're not building a chemistry set, you're just refusing to hand pests a clean, single crop target. The third one follows straight from that, and it's the shift that did the most for me once it clicked. For most of my gardening life, I was trying to get to zero bugs, no bugs, good garden. But a garden with no insects in it isn't healthy, it's empty. What you want isn't no insects, it's the right ones, in the right balance, doing the work for you. Consider what you've got working for free if you let it. A single lady beetle can eat something like 50 aphids in a day. A lacewing larva, an ugly little thing, looks like a tiny alligator, can go through a couple hundred aphids before it's grown. Parasitic wasps lay their eggs inside hornworms and cabbage worms and finish them off from the inside. Ground beetles patrol the soil at night, eating slugs and cutworms and grubs. That's an unpaid pest control crew, and every time you blanket spray, even with an organic spray, you're firing them along with the pests you were aiming at. That's the part that took me too long to see. The spray doesn't know the difference between the aphid and the ladybug that was about to eat it. So the job is to keep that crew fed and housed. The simplest way is what's sometimes called an insectary strip, a fancy name for a plain idea. Give up a strip along one edge of the garden, even just a couple of feet wide, and plant it with flowers the beneficial insects live on. Sweet alyssum down low in front, yarrow and dill behind it, a little fennel at the back if you've got room. The one rule that matters is continuous bloom. You want something flowering from spring right through fall, so there's never a stretch where the good bugs show up hungry and leave. Within a few weeks of the first flowers, that strip will be humming, and those insects don't stay in the strip. They patrol the whole garden and leave a little of your ground alone on purpose. A patch of clover, an unmowed strip along the fence, a pile of stones, or an old log. That's not neglect, that's housing. Ground beetles and spiders need somewhere to shelter and get through the winter. A garden scraped down to bare soil between every row looks sharp, but you've hung a no vacancy sign on the exact allies you're trying to attract. One honest caution, because I made this mistake myself. You can buy ladybugs in a bag. I did, my first year, released a whole sack of them, felt very clever, and by the next morning every one had flown off. If there's nothing blooming and nowhere to shelter, they've got no reason to stay. Build the flowers and the habitat first. Get that right, and you won't need to buy a thing. They'll come on their own, and they'll stay. The fourth habit is the most old-fashioned of the lot, and I think that's exactly why it's the most effective. It's simply walking your garden, slowly, every morning. I don't mean strolling out to admire your tomatoes, though there's nothing wrong with that. I mean looking, turning leaves over, checking the undersides of the squash foliage, where the trouble hides, running your eye down the stems. And when you find a pest, you pick it off by hand and drop it in a little tub of soapy water you carry with you. That's the whole technique, and it sounds too simple to matter until you understand what it does. Serious pest damage almost never comes from one or two bugs. It comes from a small problem you didn't catch turning into a big one. A single tomato hornworm can strip a branch bare in a couple of days, and one female squash bug can lay a couple hundred eggs over a few weeks, cluster after cluster on the undersides of your leaves. By the time the damage is bad enough to spot from the path, you're already behind, and that's usually when people panic and reach for the strongest thing on the shelf. The morning walk catches it earlier. 2 hornworms on Monday, picked off by hand, is a 30-second job. 20 hornworms by Friday is a crisis. Same problem, caught at 2 different sizes. Here's how to do it. Give it 15 minutes, and bring a tub half full of water with a squirt of dish soap in it. On tomatoes, look along the top growth and stems for hornworms. They hide well against the green, so a good trick is to look on the leaves below for their droppings, little dark pellets. Then look up. On squash and cucumbers, flip the leaves and look for tight clusters of small coppery eggs on the undersides. Those are squash bug eggs, and scraping them off with a thumbnail now saves you a real fight in 3 weeks. On cabbage and broccoli and kale, watch for little green caterpillars and for the white cabbage butterflies fluttering around laying the next batch. I won't oversell how pleasant it is, but I'll be honest, it became my favorite part of the day. It's quiet before everything gets going, and it keeps you connected to what's really happening out there. You develop an eye for your own garden that no spray schedule will ever give you. One honest limit, because this changes with size. If you're tending a few beds, the morning walk handles most of it. If you're working a quarter acre, you won't catch everything by hand, and that's where a lightweight floating row cover earns its keep. It's a thin fabric you lay over the young brassicas and squash. It lets light and rain through, but keeps the egg-laying moths and beetles off. Just pull it back once the squash and cucumbers start flowering, or you'll keep the pollinators out along with the pests, and then you've traded a bug problem for no fruit. The 5th idea always makes people smile once they get it, because it's a bit of a con. Instead of trying to keep pests out of the garden altogether, you invite them in and point them at the wrong plant. It's called trap cropping. You plant something a pest likes even better than your vegetables, set it out at the edges, and the pests gather there instead of on the crop you care about. The classic one is nasturtiums for aphids. Aphids will pick a nasturtium over your beans or peppers almost every time. Ring the outside of the garden with them, and the aphids pile onto the nasturtiums and largely leave the main crop alone. Then you've got a choice. Pull the loaded plants and get rid of them, or, if you've built that insectary strip, just leave them, because a nasturtium covered in aphids is a buffet that draws every ladybug and lacewing in the neighborhood. That's the whole system feeding itself. For flea beetles, the little jumping ones that pepper eggplant and young greens with shot holes, a row of radishes set a couple of feet in front of the crop pulls them off. They'd rather have the radish leaves. And for squash bugs and cucumber beetles, a couple of blue Hubbard squash plants set around the edges work as a decoy. Those big coarse plants are magnets, and the pests crowd onto them instead of your main squash. You're not trying to save the blue Hubbard, it's bait. Now let me push back on one thing you'll hear said about trap crops. People claim they're no work, plant them once and forget them. That's not quite true, and I'd rather you hear it from me. A trap crop only helps if you actually deal with the pests it gathers. Let a nasturtium load up with aphids, and then just leave it against your beans with no predators around, and you haven't drawn the pests away, you've built them a nursery next door. So think of a trap crop as a place that concentrates the problem where you can see it and handle it, not a set and forget fix. Used that way, it's one of the cheapest, cleverest tricks there is. The 6th thing is the only one that involves mixing anything up, and even then it's about 10 minutes of work. Because I'll be the first to say it, sometimes prevention isn't enough. Pressure spikes, or one crop gets hit harder than the rest, and you want to push back directly without reaching for the harsh stuff. A simple kitchen spray does a fair job. Here's the one I keep coming back to. Take 4 or 5 cloves of garlic and a couple of hot peppers, cayenne or whatever's hot and handy, and chop them up. Drop them in a quart of warm water and let it steep overnight. In the morning, strain it through a bit of cloth into a spray bottle and stir in a teaspoon of plain liquid dish soap. Spray it on the affected plants and get the undersides of the leaves where most of the trouble hides. Do it early morning or evening, never in the midday sun. The soap can scorch leaves in strong heat. One application usually holds 5 to 7 days, and you'll want to redo it after a hard rain. But I want to be straight about what this is, because it's exactly the kind of home remedy that gets oversold online. It does not kill an infestation on contact the way a synthetic pesticide does. It makes your plants smell and taste unpleasant, so pests move along, and the soap helps knock back soft-bodied bugs like aphids. It's a deterrent, and a mild one, as one piece of a whole system: good soil, mixed planting, the beneficial bugs, the morning walk. It's plenty. As a rescue for a garden that's already overrun, it won't save the day, and I won't pretend otherwise. Match the tool to the size of the problem. Before I wrap up, one small trick that, dollar for dollar, has protected more of my plants than anything else on this list, and it's almost embarrassingly simple. When you set young seedlings out into the garden, put a little collar around the base of each one, a ring of cardboard pushed about an inch into the soil and standing a couple of inches above it. An old toilet paper tube cut in half is exactly the right size. A paper towel roll cut into sections works too. That's the whole thing. That cardboard ring does two jobs. First, it stops cutworms, the caterpillars that travel along the soil at night and chew straight through the stem of a young transplant at ground level. You come out in the morning and a healthy seedling is just lying there, felled like a little tree. They're behind far more overnight seedling deaths than most people realize, and the collar stops them cold because they can't get past it to the stem. Second, the cardboard rots away on its own over 4 to 6 weeks, right about the time the stem has toughened up enough that cutworms can't bite through it anyway. No plastic, nothing to throw away, no chemicals, just a scrap of cardboard protecting the plant through the few weeks it's most vulnerable. I started doing this a few seasons back, and I went from losing a good handful of transplants every spring to losing almost none. It doesn't make headlines, it just quietly saves your garden one seedling at a time, and it costs you nothing but the rolls you were going to throw out. So that's the whole picture, and notice what isn't in it: hardly any spending and no war. Build your soil a little every year, mix your planting up so pests can't find a clean target, and let some of it flower. Feed and house the good insects so they do the hard work for free. Walk the garden in the morning and catch small problems while they're still small. Use a trap crop or two to pull pests off to the side. And keep a simple kitchen spray on hand for the days you need a little extra, knowing exactly what it can and can't do. If you take one thing from all this and do it this week, make it the compost and the morning walk. Those two cost you nothing and do the most. And do what I'd tell anyone: try it on one small part of the garden first. Give it a full season to show you something, and remember your soil and climate may behave differently from mine. A garden doesn't need to be perfect to feed you. Let the garden do more of the work. I'll see you next time.